So here we are. This is our manifest destiny. We talked about this in class, how we expanded from sea to shining sea, Atlantic to the Pacific Ocean, and we've done it as we thought was God's will. And now we had to deal with this horrible thing. The idea that slavery would be moved out west into those new territories acquired by our manifest destiny. This awful institution where we see people in there for their whole lives, held in chains like we see here, forced to pick cotton and sometimes brutally punished. You can see the scars on the back of that slave's back from years and years of whippings. Many people were abolitionists. Abolitionists were against slavery. Harriet Tubman is a good example right here. She helped slaves escape on the Underground Railroad. Abolitionists, the word abolish means to stop, would have meetings, try to promote anti-slavery laws in government, and even help slaves escape. They certainly did not want slavery to spread out west. And that's exactly what we had to worry about. When the Louisiana Territory was purchased and we started to organize it, would those states that would eventually come out of it have slavery or not? And for a while, our government was at a standstill. There was an equal amount of slave states, states with slavery, and an equal amount of free states, states that did not have slavery. And the idea is, how can we add new states without this becoming an issue when states were fighting over who had the most power in government? So let's take a minute and get these notes. Go ahead and pause the video here, read it while you insert the words. Copy it right from here, and certainly push pause as long as you need to. Then continue with the lesson. The Missouri Compromise is what came out of this idea. The first problem was Missouri wanted to become a state, and it had slaves in it. So everybody sort of freaked out. We can't do anything. We've got this many free states, this many slave states, and if we add a slave state, what are we supposed to do? We're going to lose our balance of power. That's when this man came about. His name's Henry Clay. Henry Clay was a congressman, and Henry Clay would throw our country a life vest, kind of like we were drowning in this water, and Clay came about and chucked that life vest in the water and helped us, and he did it by creating some compromises. The first is a compromise for when Missouri wanted to become a state. And basically Clay said, well, let Missouri become a slave state, and how about we add this state, Maine, at the same time, and that would keep the balance of power between the two of them. In addition, we will draw this line right here. You can see it right there. I want you to draw that line on your map, on your notes. And that line basically said, hey, well, this will divide the country, and for future years, anything above it can not be open to slavery. Anything below it can be open to slavery, including the Florida Territory. And that's called the Missouri Compromise. Let's take a moment and copy this into our chart. The Missouri Compromise, Part 1 was Missouri becomes a slave state. Part 2, Maine becomes a free state. Part 3, we're going to draw a line to handle any future issues. That's the big one, so that we'll never have to deal with this again. Now we've added the Louisiana Purchase. Everything's great. Pause here if you need to. But I wonder if you can figure out what happens next. What happens? We expand again. This time we fight a war with Mexico after annexing Texas, and we also acquire the Oregon Territory, and that means the Missouri Compromise is null and void. It no longer works. Take a moment and copy these notes. Pause if you need to. So once again, we're going to add this giant tract of land, and that's our entire west and southwest, and that means we've added a bunch more. So the Missouri Compromise no longer works, and we start fighting again, not physically yet, but fighting again over how we'll handle slavery in these territories. So along comes Henry Clay again. Henry Clay in 1850 came up with another compromise after he created the Missouri Compromise. The compromise he created in 1850 was called the Compromise of 1850. He threw us this life vest and saved the United States from destroying itself and fighting over slavery one more time. And he created this thing, the Compromise of 1850. You'll see that this is a little bit more complicated. Now, in the Compromise of 1850, we've got Henry Clay coming about, and Henry Clay basically said, we're going to do the following. One, let's add California as a free state. That's one. Two, we'll add Texas as a slave state, keeping the balance. Three, we've got this giant purple territory. And look at the key. It says we're going to open this to slavery by popular sovereignty. Now, what's that mean? Popular means people. Sovereign means power. So people power means in these lands, people will vote on whether or not they will have slavery. And that's going to create all kinds of a mess. But more on that later. But that's how he avoided the issue and settled the issue. Let the people that live there decide for themselves. And the fourth and fifth parts were the parts that blew people's minds. First of all, part 4. We're going to, here's our nation's capital in Washington, D.C. We're going to ban the slave trade in Washington, D.C. Now, that's a good thing, but you might also say, wow, we were still buying and selling slaves in our capital of this great nation as late as 1850. But that was a win for the northern side, right? So what do the Northerners get? They get no slave trade in Washington, D.C. They get a free California, and maybe here in the popular sovereignty territories, maybe no slavery. What do the Southerners get? They get a slave state of Texas. They get maybe slaves in these territories here based on popular sovereignty, and that means they're one thing short. So there's one more part to this that's kind of disgusting. Let's look at this here. And here's your notes. Don't pause just yet. I want you to listen to this. And basically, the last part right here is what the Southerners get. They get something called the Fugitive Slave Law. All people must help catch runaway slaves. So here it is broken down. And this was created by actually President Millard Fillmore, who grew up here in Western New York. He used to be the mayor of Buffalo and helped start UB, college maybe you'll go to someday. And to avoid civil war, he signed this into law, the Compromise of 1850. California is a free state, Texas is a slave state. The remaining areas, people will vote. That's called popular sovereignty. Let's actually write that in there. Popular, and then we'll write the word sovereignty. All right. And at that point then, two more things. Washington, D.C., no more slave trade, but the horrible fugitive slave law comes into play. Go ahead and pause it here if you need to. So there's the Compromise of 1850. It again avoids civil war. But it also gave us this terrible law called the Fugitive Slave Law. And these little primary sources help you understand this, I hope. So it says, caution, colored people of Boston, one and all, be careful. $150 reward for a slave named Tom. A slave hunter is among us. And here's a reward poster, another one. Now, slaves that escaped are called runaway slaves. Before the Fugitive Slave Law, if a slave got to the north, a free state, they were considered free. But with the Fugitive Slave Law, a southern slave owner is allowed to go up into a free state and capture his quote-unquote property and bring the slave back down south. You can imagine that this led to a whole bunch of bounty hunters or slave hunters roaming around trying to capture runaway slaves. You might also imagine that free black people would be kidnapped and taken down and sold into a horrible life of slavery. Now, because of the Fugitive Slave Law, two things happened. One, the only safe place for a slave was out of the country in Canada, and that's where groups like the Underground Railroad, Harriet Tubman, and others would take them. Secondly, this law forced every citizen to participate in slavery. Even Northern abolitionists who hated slavery, if you were caught not helping to capture a slave, as according to the Fugitive Slave Law, you yourself would be sent to jail or fined or both. The Fugitive Slave Law made a lot of anti-slavery people in the North very angry. And that's what our next trial is going to be about. A person, a whole town actually, that violated or allegedly violated the Fugitive Slave Law by helping a slave named John Price escape. More on that later on. But at the same time, everybody thought that this particular law would solve the problems of the country. The Compromise of 1850, it worked for a while, but it did not solve the issues. All through the decade of the 1850s, all kinds of events happened to slowly rip this compromise apart while it was ripping the United States apart, to the point where there was nothing left to do. The only thing that could save us was in 1860, if we could elect a president that the whole country could agree on, that could keep the nation together, maybe we would avoid civil war. That man elected was Abraham Lincoln, and he was despised by the South. But he was the perfect leader if we were going to fight a civil war, to have the goals of ending slavery and keeping our country together. That's it. We'll see you at the next one. Have a good day.